hurts to be mended. Touch now. Touch now, God, and have your way. Move in such a way, God, that you bring things back. Move in such a way, God, to where you rectify wrongs. We need a healing today, God. We need your power in this house to resurrect some dead things even right now. Thank you, Jesus. We're walking on two legs, but we're dead. Smiling and moving, but we're dead on the inside. So we need your resurrection power today, God. God, we yield to you. We thank you in advance for what you're going to do. In Jesus' mighty name, amen and amen. Amen. If you have your Bibles, please turn with me to 2 Corinthians, the 13th chapter. I got the stand here. I'm not being grand. I just need this freedom to move today. Thank you, Jesus. For our pastor in his absence. For our bishop, first of all, in his presence. For our overseer who is here. We thank God for the man of God who has labored for 40 years. Made all this possible. We thank God for Bishop William L. Brigham. Amen, somebody. I said amen, somebody. Thank God for his wisdom and for his geniusness. It takes a lot to do what you've done this long. We thank God for our pastor in his absence. We thank God for our secretary in his absence. Thank God for all the preachers, Minister Kim, Minister Barbara. Thank God for everyone, all the deacons in their places. Thank God for my wife. Amen. I'll live up to that introduction you gave me. Praise God. But I thank God for you and you. I feel something different today, so I need y'all to pray with me. As we look at 2 Corinthians, the 13th chapter, looking at verse 5. Verse 5. Hallelujah. Thank you, Lord God. The Bible, if you have 2 Corinthians, the 13th chapter, verse 5, I need you to say amen. Amen. The Bible says, examine yourselves. Whether ye be in the faith. Prove your own selves. Know ye not your own selves how that Jesus Christ is in you, except ye be reprobates. I want to read that again so that it may sink into our spirits and not just our mind. Examine yourselves. Whether ye be in the faith. Prove yourself. Know ye not your own selves how that Jesus Christ is in you, except ye be reprobates. And just for a few moments, I want to take the time to deal with the thought of examine yourself. If I could use a subtopic, it would be surviving the testing ground. You may be seated. We're talking about examining ourselves. I'm not going to use this. Thank you, Jesus. Hallelujah. We're talking about a subject that's not concentrated on the diabolical parts of the enemy. A lot of times, we preach sermons about that poor old devil. We talk about how bad he is to us, and then we move on and we talk about things such as our haters. And today's subject won't be about that mean old devil. Today's sermon won't be about the haterade in your hater and your neighbors. But today's word is going to be about something more elusive. It's going to be about something just as vicious something that is justifiable in its wrong action is called self. And we need to be true to this text. And I'll teach my students all the time that if you're going to understand a verse, you got to understand the content and the context of that verse. You see, Paul writing in the 13th chapter of the 2nd Corinthians is not the first time that Paul has attempted to initiate contact with this church. This is actually Paul's third time writing to them. This is his third attempt to get some stuff right with this church. You see that in 1 Corinthians that he talks about trying to identify problems in the church. Paul comes in as an apostle. He comes in as a planter. He comes in as a pastor, someone who has labored before him. He comes in to teach them how to live correctly in a corrupt society. Paul takes time with them. He's coming in 1 Corinthians and talking about how to operate with the gifts of the Spirit. He lays down the groundwork, and he talks about addressing how to be loyal in leadership. He's talking about overcoming sexual immorality. He takes his time and he works with them, Brother Jay. He teaches them the proper order of worship, even including the Lord's Supper. And then he has to defend and affirm the power of the resurrection. This is in 1 Corinthians. Now then Paul moves to his third visitation, and we see this in 2 Corinthians. He now has to come to a place to where he has to affirm his apostleship. You know, it's something with folk. It's something with folk. Now, Paul planted this church. Paul started this church. Paul labored for this church. Paul put groundwork in this church. They would even be a body if it wasn't for Paul. But now we see the same people questioning Paul's leadership. Come on now. The end of chapter 13 is a culmination of Paul having to defend himself, defend his apostleship, defend his ministry, to be able to teach them. Now Paul, and tell them who he is, Brother Ron, he begins to teach them how to love. You find Bishop in 1 Corinthians, the 13th chapter, he teaches them, why are you looking at me? Let me teach you how to deal with God in love. He says, I need you to understand that at the core of every believer should be the center of love. He said, love suffers long. You know how it is with church folks. We ain't got time for a mess a long time. He said, love suffers long, and it is kind, and it envies not, it vaunteth not itself up, and it is not puffed up. He said, love does not behave itself unseemly, seeketh not her own, and is not easily provoked. He goes on to teach them that love thinketh no evil. It rejoices not in iniquity, but it rejoices in the truth. He said love bears all things. Amen. Love believes all things. Love hopes all things. Then love endures all things. He said love never fails. He said, but where there's going to be some prophecies, they're going to fall away. Where there be tongues, they shall cease, and where there be knowledge, they shall vanish. He said, but love never fails. Now with this in mind, having given the groundwork, teaching them what love is, teaching them how to love, teaching them, he now has to revisit them again. Y'all know all these hard-headed children, you got to tell them something over and over more than one time, you start feeling some kind of way, parents. He comes to them now, and he teaches them now. He's coming to in a real stern voice. What you hear in the 5th verse of 2 Corinthians, the 13th chapter, is Paul with an attitude. Paul now has had it right about up to here, Sister Rose. He's taken about all he's going to take from these folk. Paul done said, I done tried to tell you about how to love one another. I done tried to tell you how to deal with each other. I told you about the gifts and the meekness and the fruit and the power of God. But since you still got a pointing finger, my God. Y'all know how you do it. Since you still have a finger of accusation to point at somebody, while you pointing the finger at me, let me remind you that there's somebody else that needs to be investigated. Amen, somebody. Y'all know how it is. You got folk always can find fault in you. Always can see the dysfunction in your life. And don't have the same eye of scrutiny when it comes to themselves. But Paul said, if you're going to be pointing fingers at somebody, let me start by showing you where to point your fingers here. Paul said, if you're going to do this, you need to point your fingers towards yourself. He says, I want you to look at yourself. And if you look at how the text around is, it's talking about examining oneself. If you look in Jeremiah's writing in Lamentation, the 3rd chapter, we find how he is lamenting over the destruction over the city of Jerusalem, and he calls the people to examine themselves and then turn back to God. If you see how Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians, the 11th chapter, he tells them when concerning the Lord's Supper, let a man examine himself. There's always this sign, this returning effort in the Bible for man to look at man. It ain't talking about me looking at you. He's talking about me looking at me. If we would take more time to take care of our own business. But I get some help in there right there. If we would take the time to sweep around our own front door. We wouldn't have the time left over to run somebody else down. But Paul is telling them, Bishop, he said in 1 Corinthians, the 11th chapter, I need for you to be careful how you handle God. Be careful how you handle the things of God. And I need for you to examine yourself. But Paul now in the 2nd Corinthians, the 13th chapter, Paul now is saying what seems to be the same word. He's saying, examine yourselves as to whether you are in the faith and to whether you can prove yourself. And in doing so, you see how Paul writes this. Paul is saying, as you examine yourself, you are proving. While you are continuing to examine, then you will be continuing to prove. It's not in your testimony that you convince me you got it. It's not in how you dance that you convince me you got it. It's in your present ability to examine yourself that you will continually be able to prove that you are in the faith. Now you got to understand that when you deal with this word examine, it seems like what he said in 1 Corinthians is the same word as in 2 Corinthians, but it's not so. When Paul said in 1 Corinthians concerning the Lord's Supper, he said, let a man examine himself. That was the Greek word dokimazo, which means to discern oneself. It means to approve oneself. He's talking about you prove by having the view of approving. The reason in 1 Corinthians is this examine is so important. It means that I'm able to prove I got it because I can see me. My eyes is not on myself. My eyes are not on my neighbors. My eyes are not on my sister, my brother, but my eyes is on me. I keep myself in a position where I always can see me. See, that's where the saints ought to be. But then he comes in 2 Corinthians in the 13th chapter in verse 5, and he says what seems to be in the English the same word. He said, examine yourselves. But this examine is another Greek word, pirazo. It means to discipline. It means to scrutinize. It means to test. That means that Paul is saying now, since you are quick to point fingers at me, let me turn around and challenge you to test yourself. To put the eye of scrutiny that you have on me, put it towards yourself. Paul is saying now, this test means testing oneself with the intention of discovering whether we as a person are good or we are evil. This test discerns and discovers if we as a person, if we are really strong or if we're weak. Because you know how we can do, we can sound strong from 11 to 2. You know, when the music's playing and the rhythm just right, we can kind of step and we can tell the world, I got it. But when you leave here and then the saints are not around, how are you able to stand when the storms of life are really raging in your life? How can you stand for real when your sister and your brother are not there to help you with your fall? When you test yourself, when you examine yourself, you are letting self see whether I am good or whether I'm evil. Finding out what's really on the inside of us, whether I'm strong or whether I am weak. See, it's one thing to try to convince me that you got something, but it's another thing when you're trying to fool your own self. Some of us been lying in church so long, we've almost fooled ourselves, preacher. We've been trying to convince other folk with our testimony that how much we got God on the inside when the life we live really don't lie. So he says here, he said we have to examine ourselves. Let me slow down. He said, Bishop, we got to examine ourselves. And then you would ask the question, but preacher, if I buy into this examining, this testing, this scrutiny, this thing you say we got to do, then the question would remain, why must I examine myself? My God. Why, Paul? Why, Paul, are you deflecting off you to me? Why must I examine myself? And Paul said the reason you have to examine yourself is so that you can prove whether you are in the faith or not. Paul didn't say you test yourself to see if you have faith. No, because the Bible says that it is given to every man a measure of faith. The reason you sat down in this chair proves you have faith. Yeah, you test yourself is not a determination if you have faith. You testing yourself, you examine yourself, it is a testimony, it is a discovery if you are in the faith. It's one thing to have faith, and it's another thing to be faithful. It's one thing to say, I got it. It's another thing to walk in faith with the Lord. And you have to understand that if you're not always examining yourself, there is a danger of drifting away. I know we think we can just do any kind of thing we want to do, live any kind of way, and God don't be pleased with us. That's a lie from the devil's hell. You cannot just do anything you want to do. If you're not always watching yourself, if you're not always testing, examining yourself, there is a possibility of drifting away. A possibility of drifting away if we neglect our salvation. There is a possibility to develop an evil heart of unbelief. It is possible to move away from God and you not know that you moved. My God, Jesus. Saul lost the anointing and didn't even know it was gone. See, when you live in a place of self-denial, if you live in a place where you don't watch self can be wrong and you not know it. That's right. You shouting, going the only way to hell. Oh, my God, my God. Have mercy, Lord. Have mercy, Lord. But also, mother, there's a way to know that not only if I'm in the faith, but it also teaches me where I stand before God. When I test myself, Bishop, when I test myself, saint, I am checking to see where I am positioned with God. Yeah. Number two is the reason I test myself, the reason I examine myself, not just to see if I'm in the faith, but to determine if Christ is in me. Christ is in me. Does he live in me? Yeah. Does he abide in me? Does he dwell in me? Is Jesus the Lord really the center of my joy? Is he really living where I say he's living? Or does he rent a shack every now and then? Does Jesus really abide in me all the time? Or does he just have a spot he drops in every now and then when I make a rent space available for him? Paul tells them, and he talks about that you can know whether or not Jesus is living in you. And the fact to know that your body, your spirit, your temple is the housing agent of the Most High God is a good thought to have. Jesus wants you to understand that I made you so I can live in you. I want you to understand that I made you with the capacity to hold all of me. He said that I made you with the capacity to hold that which could not be held. When they describe God, they describe God as one who cannot be contained. When they describe God, they describe him as who reaches from everlasting to everlasting, from the unseen world to the unseen world. Now you tell me, God, that you made me with my finite self, with the capacity to hold which cannot be held. So that's what God has said. He said, I made you with the intent, with the distinction to be able to hold all of me. Not just some of me, but all of me. Isn't that good news? That you was made with the unique ability to hold all of God. You were able to hold the mind of God, the thought of God, the love of God. You were able to hold God. That's why the devil comes to break you not against others, but to break you against yourself. Because if you can stop checking self, then you make less room for God. Test myself to see if Jesus the Christ is really in me. And when did he get in me? When did he get in me? He got in me supposedly at salvation. When did salvation take place? And contrary to the popular belief, contrary to this new millennial church here, we believe that salvation happened when I believe. No. Yeah, you need to believe in Jesus Christ. You need to believe according to Romans 9. You need to believe, but believing in salvation. Lord, y'all got quiet on me here. You might think that it's when I received it, when I confessed it. No, that's not it either. Because Jesus said in Mark 16 and Matthew 28, along with your believing, along with your confessing, along with all that, you got to have some water. All right. There's something called baptized. There's something called being immersed in water. You can confess all you want to confess. You can believe all you want to believe. You can receive all you want to receive. But until you hit that water, I know we live in this microwave society where we can get Jesus on the go. But there's something about submitting to the principles of God. He said, except ye believe and baptized. Yeah, you got to believe and be baptized. There's something about that water that